I'm the UK Spotlight Specialist here at Vectorworks. My background is mostly in theatre and opera and music concerts as a lighting designer, programmer, and production electrician. But I now work for Vectorworks. So event design is not particularly my background, so I've been learning a lot about rendering. So I wanted to run through some of the event tool set with you this morning and use it as a way to maybe give you some hints and tips that you might find useful. And we're going to touch a little bit on render styles and textures and how to get some really great looking renders from a very quick model. Like me, you probably find yourself with perhaps a little bit more time than you might usually have. So what I'd also like to ask you to suggest is if anyone has got any ideas for any webinars that you'd like to cover in the next few weeks, please do also put those in the chat. And where lots of people share the same concerns, maybe we can create a webinar for that topic for you all. So do tell us what you'd also like to learn about with Vectorworks over the next few weeks' time. So the other thing you might also consider if you've got a bit more free time at present is just brushing up your Vectorworks. So we've got the Vectorworks University online, which we'll show you a link at the end of the session, where you can learn for free. There's loads of online e-learning courses which you can use, and as well as upskilling. We might also want to, after this session, look at improving your Vectorworks template files. We're going to be running some webinars on templates as well. And there's all kinds of other little bits and bobs that you can do to streamline your workflow. So stay tuned for that in the next couple of weeks. So the file that we're going to be looking at today, I'll just turn my camera off, there we go. So this is a fictional event. We have a venue file, which we call the Spotlight Cube, and it's hosted a number of fictional events in it, just a kind of a way for us to demonstrate the software. Just have a quick look at this venue. The venue itself is a referenced file, so it's actually not in the current Vectorworks drawing. This is quite a handy way if you've got 3D models of venues, you can just reference the layers in and actually create geometry that's unique to that file then. Let's have a look at our venue in an isometric way. There's a tool I wanted to share with you called the Clip Cube, which is hidden away in a menu somewhere. So I'm just going to explain. So along this toolbar here in Vectorworks, you'll notice I've got a few more icons than you might currently have, and you can actually add shortcuts to some of the preferences for these tools on here. So some of the Vectorworks preferences can be shortcuts, and you could also add additional tools in. So do just have a quick investigate in these two drop downs, and you'll see that you can customize the appearance of this taskbar up here. So the Clip Cube, which I'm going to show you now, you need to enable the tool by checking it in this list. And it's this half-cut teapot. So if I just zoom out a little bit and show you how it works. So with nothing selected, it creates a bounding box around the extents of the model. I can then select the box, and then I can move each of the faces through the model like so. It's just a really handy way of getting inside objects and editing in complex 3D geometry in a really straightforward way. So I've got a save view here. You can also record them in save views, which is really helpful. In terms of how the Clip Cube can be maneuvered, you see here on your screen we've got this kind of teal dot in the center of the Clip Cube. I can now pick up and move it around. You'll also notice that it's behaving in a slightly jumpy way, and that's simply because I've got my snapping palettes turned on currently. Now I don't want to have to manually unclick those to turn them off, so there is I forget what it's called now, a wiggly line key just next to the Z key, just to the left of your Z key, and if I push and hold that, it then disables the snapping, which basically just means that I can then really smoothly maneuver the Clip Cube through the model. Okay, so once I've got the Clip Cube in the place that I want it, I can also rotate it around. So each one of these dark blue dots, you'll see I get the rotate icon on my cursor. I can click and hold and just rotate this Clip Cube around and cut through the model on a particular angle. Now, as well as actually using this as a working tool, as a way of just accessing geometry, if you right-click on one of the faces, you can also use the Clip Cube to create a section viewport of that particular line through there. It works in exactly the same way as the section line tool, and you can choose which sheet to send it to, etc. So I'm going to be recalling the clip cube in a number of saved views, which we're going to see during the course of the presentation. So let's now look at hosting a kind of fictional event inside our space. So the first thing I'm going to do in this event space is just put some carpet down. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm just going to draw a polyline, which I'm going to extrude and assign some text to this. Now, actually, I've just remembered, before I get too ingrained in this, if I just show you my current resource manager, one also thing I wanted to show to you is it's often a good idea before a project starts to create some textures. Now, if you're in your open file in Vectorworks, you can right-click into the space and select New Resource, RenderWorks Texture. There we go. So I can create a new texture in this way. If I just show you one of the existing textures I've worked on. So I've been working on a texture for some carpets, some nice black Harlequin flooring that's slightly reflective, and a texture which I'm going to use to cover my chairs. So let's have a look at this one. So I can choose a particular color in here. So as well as actually using the color picker, I can, if I click the second option, I can actually access a massive list of manufacturers' colors, which I can then cherry pick the one I want from here. I'm quite happy with the red I've got for now, so I'll leave that. I can also experiment with various different reflective capabilities, for example. So I could go to glass. If I want it to illuminate in any way, which I'll show you with the screen texture, I could make it glow. If I just stick to plastic for now. Transparency is fairly easy to understand if it's translucent in any way, and bump is any kind of roughness, etc. Okay, so I've also created the client's logo. I've created that as a texture. So I'll just show you this. And this is essentially changing the color options to image and then choosing the image. So actually just importing it as a PNG, bitmap, JPEG. Now, once you import it, you can also tweak it as well. So if you need to do any kind of Photoshoppy things to it before you come in and use it as a texture, you've got the ability to do that. I've also unticked the horizontal and vertical tiling because it's a single logo that I want to use on my video screens. And I've also given it a glow texture. Now, I've left this at 100%, but I just wanted to say that if this is not quite bright enough, you can increase this 600-700% fold. You can just keep going. So don't see the 100% and think that's the limit. You can really just keep going with this. Okay, so that's the texture I'm going to use for my screen. So let's hop back and then let's have a look at creating some geometry for our carpet. So what I would normally do is I would go to the polyline tool and I would start in one of the corners of my drawing and I would just click once. There we go, start there. Now, the other thing just to bear in mind is if I push and hold the middle mouse button or spacebar if you're on a laptop, a Mac rather, I think it's the same on a PC, I'm not sure. But if you can actually just sort of page up, if I zoom out, I can page up and then you'll notice that when I release the pan tool, the polyline tool is handily still selected. So it means I can very quickly draw a massive polyline around my room. You'll also notice that the polyline has different modes. So I can actually go up to the toolbar to choose a different mode, like so. I'm going to do this one in a slightly rough way. I've got a Blue Peter, here's one I made earlier to show you after I'm done. But rather than having to keep going up to here every time I want to change the mode, I can type the letter U. And actually you'll see as I hit the U key, it's going to toggle between the various modes of the polyline tool. Okay, the other thing I want to very quickly show you with the polyline tool is if you make a mistake and think, oh, actually, I didn't mean to put that one there. So if you use the backspace, it will actually take you back to the last node that you created, which is another handy tip. So you don't have to start again from scratch. Now, the other little tip I wanted to share with you is if you've made a mistake, you can use the reshape handle tool in terms of editing this, and you can just pick and move points around. But the other thing you can also do is you can select the polygon and you can do modify, decompose, and I can just actually, let's delete that and let's connect these two together. And then let's select them again and then modify compose. So there are the little handy things you can do. If your polyline is absolutely huge, which in events it often is if you're tracing around an entire venue, decompose and compose is also quite useful. So as I mentioned earlier, here is one I made earlier. Okay, now with my 2D polyline, I'm simply going to do model extrude and just essentially just enter a height value. And if I'm just drawing a carpet or something, then it is kind of fairly irrelevant as to what the height is. So I've just extruded it, I think a couple of millimeters, it's fine, 5 millimeters, that's fine. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do then is through the render tab, I can then assign a texture to this shape. Okay, I can also do this with classes, which is a workflow we recommend, but if you're just sketching out a very quick event, you can choose the texture through here. You get a kind of the last known texture you use comes up by default, etc. So I can actually pick a texture. I'm just going to set that to none because here's another one I made earlier. So there's the carpet with our red texture. Now the texture has quite a bit of weave and weft to it, warp and weft, but we're not really seeing that at the moment because we're looking at everything in OpenGL. So when you're working in the workspace, the graphics are slightly simplified just to enable you to work and optimize your hardware. You can, if you want to, just have a quick look at what it would look like. I'd recommend probably using Fast Renderworks for this, but really the best way, which I'm going to show you later on in this presentation, is to probably use the camera tool, make some viewports and actually render those just to give you an idea. So the next thing we're going to do is let's just draw a stage in our venue. I'm going to go to a top plan view and let's just take it as read that I've created some 2D shapes here. Okay, so this is the shape that I want my stage to be in, and rather than use a polyline, I've actually just drawn two simple 2D shapes. So now I can select these two shapes, I can right click on them, and I can do a command called add surface. Okay, and what add surface does is it essentially just fuses them together and converts them into a polyline like so. The reason we're using a polyline is because we're going to use this shape to make some stage deck. Now you don't have to use the Event Design Create Stage tool. It's a great tool. It's got loads of other, it brings with it lots of data in terms of it then understands how many decks you need, what sizes the decks are. You can just extrude things. So if you just want to make a simple 3D model, there's nothing wrong with just extruding your stage straight. But let's have a look at using this shape to make a stage. So Event Design Create Stage. So in here we can say, right, the stage height's going to be 600 millimeters. You can also put imperial measurements in here as well if you want to, so you could do steel deck measurements. Let's say it's metric deck, 1 by 2 meters, and let's choose a border. You could choose legs, for example, have it just as the floating deck. What you choose on here will essentially control which 3D options you're able to apply to the stage deck. So if we now just have a look at 3D options, I could change the class, etc., and the fill and the pen color. So at the moment, I'm just going to leave it as a color. I could actually, if I wanted to, get the stage deck to reference the carpet texture that I made earlier on, but I'm just going to leave it for now because I've actually made another extrude on top of the stage with a harlequin texture. Okay, so again, it has got we're going to put a red skirting around our stage, nice red border, click OK. So again, I'm just going to play the next save view just to show what that looks like complete. Okay, so here is our 2D, so they're hybrid objects. So this is the 2D of our stage objects. So if we look at it in 3D, we can see that there's our stage. And we can also just see its nice red skirting there as well. Okay, so next thing to do then is we're just going to create some seating. So if we just go to our top plan view, the seating tool in 2020 has moved. It used to be up in the event design toolset. It's now been given its own tool in the other event design toolset on the bottom left-hand side. So seating section. So with this tool, I can essentially just draw a unique polyline shape, or I could use a pre-existing shape, but I just thought I'd show you both. So just kind of roughly drawn that. So I can choose how I want to space the seats. I can also curve the seating as well. Obviously, I need to focus mine in the other direction. I'll show you. So in terms of these options here, we can basically tell it the back leg to front leg measurement. Now, the allowable distance past the boundary, this is based on let's say that I've left 2 meters for the current fire exits in the venue, but I know that 1 meter 10 is really all they need. So I know I've got 900 millimeters current space available around the outside of my seating layout. So what this essentially means is that later on I can dip back in to the limits and I can actually begin to limit the number of seats that I've got available in the seating section. Now, as well as obviously applying a rake to the seats as well, if it was theatre style, I can then choose a whole host of different seating symbols. So when I open this box down here, it basically opens the resource manager, so I can look at what I'm currently working within the file. I can also look at a neighboring file if there's a chair somewhere else. You can create your own seating symbols. You can use mesh objects, import stuff from SketchUp. If you attach an event record to it, you can use it in conjunction with this tool as well. So there's also a huge, vast library of kind of default seats just to get you going, including things like tables and chairs, etc. as well. So I can give my seating layout a name, I can get it to number the seats, and I can also get it to automatically number the rows as well. Okay, so I'm going to talk about limits is something you can come back in later on to change the total number of seats that you're using. Okay, and I've prefixed all of these classes. Now, where I'm actually using the UK template, which has done all of this work for you. So if you haven't looked at the UK Spotlight template yet, just do open it. All of the tool sets have been set up in an organized manner for you to use as well. So I'm going to click cancel for now. Just have a look at another way to create a seating section. So I showed you previously by using the seating section tool and drawing a shape. The other thing we can do here is we can also run a command called clip surface. So I'm going to make a much better initial shape for my seating section. And in order to do that, I can select these 2 objects and I can clip surface. So I showed you add surface earlier on. What clip surfaces essentially does is the shape that's above the other shape will stamp and cut a hole through the shape beneath it. And when you then delete your shape that you've used to cut it, you're left with a much sort of nicer seating section. So this initial shape that I've got here, I can then go to the seating section tool and I can use the paint bucket mode to literally just drop a seating section. And then I'm just going to tell it where I want the seats to focus as well. And it's going to basically open the same builder for that to happen. I'm going to show you with a completed seating section now, so we'll take it as read that that's happened. You'll see here that the seating numbers that we've applied, the row numbers, etc. What we need to do now then is we just need to put a few aisles in here as well. Now this is much improved in 2020 as well. It used to be that you used to have to just make separate seating sections and edit boundaries, but now we have the aisle tool, which essentially you can draw a polygon if you want to make it a slightly more interesting shape. I'm just going to draw a simple aisle just right through this model here. Okay, there we go. So it's just a 2D graphic in a top plan view, but you'll notice it's pretty clever because what it's done is it's also automatically renumbered and restarted the seating for you. I could then use my holding down the Alt key on a Mac, click and hold, and then copy and paste the aisle over there. So then create 2 aisles very, very quickly. Okay, so let's have a look at a finished seating section then. Be a moment. Let's have a look at it in a 3D view. So you'll see here that what I've done is essentially the aisles that I created, I assigned what we call a class to them, and then I've turned off that class. So we don't see the 2D rectangle, but we see the effect that the 2D rectangle has on our seating section. Okay, so the next thing to add now is just going to add a lectern. So we'll look at event design, create a lectern. So in here I can choose a standard one. I'm going to use this as a sort of placeholder, and then I'm going to make this a symbol, okay? And I'm going to show you how you can then edit it as well. So I've currently got the automatic plane on. This is also quite a useful thing just to make a note of. So when your plane is automatic, the cursor is going to detect the surface upon which to place an object or to draw over an object. So you'll see here that it understands that my stage has gone slightly blue, so it can place the lectern on the stage or the floor. So that just explains what that automatic plane is. It's really useful when working in 3D. So I'll just play back another view. We've already created one. And so I used one of the Vectorworks stock lecterns. There we go. Okay, and again, it's just a symbol. So I'm just going to right click on the symbol and I can edit the 3D component of that. Okay, now what I've actually done here is I have already assigned a texture to this. So you can see here that it's just been made a solid addition. So if I select each one, I can see that on the render tab of the object info palette, I can see I've assigned a brushed chrome finish to this and its base as well. And in the middle, I created a kind of light box texture. Okay, now you'll also see here OpenGL doesn't look that amazing. So let's just have a quick look at it in Fast Renderworks just so that we can get a rough idea of what it's actually going to look like. Okay. Oh, there we go. Just zoom in, let it's finished. I think it's also applying Fast Renderworks to the rest of the grayed out model. So what I'll do is another thing that's useful to show you is that whenever you have an element within Vectorworks, like a symbol, or you might have some geometry that references a texture, if you right click on it, you can locate it in the resource manager, which takes you directly to that item, which you can then edit the 3D component of. Let's have a look at this in Fast Renderworks, see if it'll do it for us. There we go. If going to zoom in, it'll re-render. So you can see now a little bit better. You can see the reflective chrome that we've got for the base, the light box stand that's there, and the reflective chrome surface. Again, as I ramp up each of the render modes, this is just going to look better and better. But at the minute, it's OpenGL, so it's just optimized for you to work in. Okay, so we've created a seating layout, staging, carpet. Let's just put some drapes and curtains or soft goods along the back. Okay, now the soft goods tool is just over here in the event design tool set. And again, it is just a polyline. So you're just going to draw the shape of the curtain object that you want to create. Let's just have a look at some of the preferences that are in the tool. So we can preset a height for the soft goods tool. We can tell it to just be a border, like a masking border around a stage or to mask some lighting. Pipe and drape is like exhibition stand, ground supported, scaff and drapes. We could also be a kabuki drop, to be honest. And all of these items are going to be collecting data in a nice sort of spreadsheet and worksheet for you to use as well. So if we just go to the 3D curtain options there, but I've already been playing around with this a little bit. So what you'd normally see is opaque and it'll be set to a color. But if you change that to custom, in here, we can actually assign a texture. So again, you could create a texture if you want to, but if we scroll down this list, we'll see at the very bottom of the Vectorworks libraries, the RenderWorks like textures, there is a soft goods folder, and in here we've got all of the Gerriot textures, loads of other events, stage cloths, etc. So there's a huge amount of stuff in here already. One of the good things to bear in mind when you're doing event design in 3D in Vectorworks is to use some of the Vectorworks stock textures and then just tinker with them a little bit. So when they're in your resource manager, you can edit them, to scale them maybe change their reflective properties. So they're kind of a useful sort of starting point. Okay, so you can just choose any fabric you want. Now, as well as selecting a fabric, you can then, in this soft goods tool, you could then scale it as well. So I've already drawn my things or my soft goods already. And essentially I've just drawn a nice sort of gentle sweeping polyline across the back. Now it's quite a tricky thing to draw. So what essentially I did is I drew one perfectly and then I used the mirror tool, which is in the basic tool set, which is to basically draw a line. So with the object selected, I can use the mirror tool to just draw a reflective line. You can see just to the right of my cursor how we've got it's going to show us where it's going to end up. So you can use that as a way of placing perfectly symmetrical items. Okay, so I've also at a later point, I've just put a few speakers in and an image prop here, a couple of other bits and bobs, which we're going to cover in some future webinars. There's already some webinars with the speaker tool as well available. But that's less of a focus for today's session. So the next thing I wanted to really show you was the LED and television screen tool. So if you remember at the beginning of the session, we created a nice screen texture. So if I just go to the television tool, I can choose how I want to insert it, from center or whatever. We just have a look at the preferences. So you can choose a type of panel to use, what the screen aspect ratio is, and then you've got all of these choices of casing. Now you'll notice, as well as the screen size, it's telling me if it's conference style on a stand on the floor, or if it's portable or pedestal, etc. So there's already a huge amount of content in here. You can also add your own screens into this library as well. If you've got the symbols, or you can draw them from a DWG, you can also add them into the default library, which this tool references basically. So you could also show the coverage zone if you wanted to. That's essentially going to show you the optimum screen viewing angle in relation to the seating, but we're not really covering that with this. We're just looking at more visuals. So let's have a look at edit screen image. So in here, I can actually then select it to choose the screen texture that I chose earlier. Hit select, perfect. I could also select the vision video source. So this isn't really about Vectorworks, but just in case you wondered what this is a way of assigning an NDI stream or a actual MPEG-4 file or a video capture card to this particular screen, so that when you export the file into Vision, you can then play content through that screen in the 3D model. Again, that's not available in Vectorworks, but it is in Vision, which if you're a VSS customer, then you've got a free license for that, so that you can start trying out and playing around with. Okay, so we can assign an image to the screen. Okay, we can also enter other useful data fields, etc. I've placed two in here already. You'll see how it then populates on my cursor, but I've got just these two screens in here. And then the other tool to show you is the LED screen tool. Okay, so I can essentially specify some panels. Okay, now I can't actually use, at the moment, our content library doesn't have actual manufacturer's known panels, although it is something that we're working on. But for now, I can actually use this to create some panels that I've got based on some known dimensions. And I can tell it to create the array based on the counts and the spacing, or on the overall dimensions and spacing, in the same way I did with this television screen. I'm just going to assign a logo in here. So in terms of getting this to fit a little bit more nicely, it's just a case of playing around with the vertical shift in here and then changing the scale of the image as well. So it's going to show you what it's going to look like essentially. Okay, so I'll take it as read that I've placed those. Okay, so it's kind of coming along nicely now. I guess we're sort of at a point where we can begin making some pictures of this. I just wanted to show you the new camera tool in 2020. So in the top plan view, I've already got some existing Renderworks cameras, which I'll explain as well. But I also just wanted to show you the video camera tool, which is in the event design tool set. It's also in the visualization tool set. So with the video camera tool, I can choose a lens from here. I can then choose a body for my camera and then a stand as well, and hit select. Once I've preset these options, I can click once to assign where I want to place the camera. And then if I can then rotate the camera around, I often then move the cursor. This is a tip. Move the cursor to the stage, just so then the camera will focus on the stage at that point. Okay, perfect. Now there's loads of options in here, so they're not on the render pane, obviously. Just go to the shape pane. I can give the camera a name. Now this is quite useful to do this, because you can use cameras in a number of ways. You can use them as sight lines, just to check what the view is going to be like from the model. And you can also use them to make viewports as well. So there's lots of options here. I can pan the camera, tilt up and down, rotate left and right, etc. Change the lens, the focal length, etc. And then I can activate the camera to have a look down it. The other thing I wanted to show you as well is there's a really useful palette when working with cameras called visualization. Now in here, it will show you what current cameras you have in your drawing. And this is why it's often a good idea to name the cameras, because you can actually flick between cameras using the visualization palette. And lighting wise, it will show you what lights you have as well, but more on that in a bit. So once I'm in a camera, I can then make a viewport from it. So I could just do create viewport, and it would essentially take the camera's current view to create the viewport. And here are some of the viewports that I've made with actually the Renderworks camera. Just so you're aware, the Renderworks camera is exactly the same as the video camera tool, but it doesn't reference a real world lens, body and stand, for example. So here is a viewport that I've made using my Renderworks camera. It's kind of early days yet with this model. I'm still going to do a bit more tweaking with it, but we can see how the textures in this render style look much better than in OpenGL. So we're getting some light emitting from our screens. This is the nice black reflective Harlequin flooring texture that I talked about, and the lectern looks a whole lot better as well. So how does this work then? So you could use the render styles. So if I just select this viewport, you'll notice here we've got it's referencing a custom render style I've made. So as well as the Vectorworks render styles, what I would encourage you all to do is to start creating your own. So you'll notice that I've got this list up here of render styles. If I just duck back to the introduction page here, I can show you I've got this nice white model render style, which I use. Now it's essentially this view's been created with a camera, but it is essentially just a render style. So where are they and where do they live and how do you make them? So basically in your resource manager in open files. Now, the other thing you might not be aware as well, just when you're looking for stuff, I mean, this is reasonably tidy for me, to be fair, but if you can also filter things. So if your resource manager isn't this tidy, or probably tidier to be fair, but if it isn't, then you can filter for Renderworks styles here. So that will show you all of the available render styles that you've got. So let's have a quick look at, for example, my white card render style. In order to create a new one, by the way, it's just a case of going new Renderworks style, Spotlight Cube Conference, okay? And now if I just go, I'll just edit this one so you can see how it works. So it's got anti-aliasing and shadows on. Quality is set to high for the curved geometry, so any geometry that's curved. The other things in here, I'm going to go into render styles in a lot more detail. We're doing a webinar next week of our exhibition stand, so if for our VSS customers. So I'm going to go into loads of detail about these next week, but just to give you a rough introduction. So textures, etc., displacement mapping, caustics. Caustics is reflected light in glass. And I can assign what kind of lighting options I want, ambient occlusion, etc., how I want the edges to appear. And I can also choose a default background as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the spotlight one with the background, because that is quite crucial. So the background, if you're using lighting devices, particularly spotlight lighting devices, and you're turning the lights on and you're using something called lit fog, in order for them to appear in your viewports, you need to choose a spotlight background. Well, you can use any background really, but I'd recommend the HDRI spotlight one. And if we just edit the resource, you'll notice here, this is because I've been in and changed it, but just so you're aware, this is usually unchecked by default. So you'll need to come back in here and turn it on. You can then assign a density for the fog, okay, and you can have it smooth or noisy. Noisy increases the render time, but it looks a bit more patchy. It looks a bit more like realistic haze. And then unless you want your lights to go through the floor, you'll also need to make sure that receive shadows is turned on in the background. Okay, so these are render styles. Once you've created them, they're not project specific, so you can move them from project to project, and you can kind of really create and customize your render style. So if we just have a quick look at some of the lighting options then. So I'm using some of the spotlight lighting devices, and I won't show you it in, so they're not really visible in OpenGL because OpenGL can only cope with up to 16 lights, but I just wanted to show you some of the settings that I've used. So I've focused my lights already. I just, if you right click on a lighting device, there we go. So if you right click on a lighting device, you can tell it to have lit fog, etc., and tell it to cast shadows. And you can also assign an intensity value for that spotlight lighting device. Okay, you'll notice that each of these lights I have actually painstakingly named. So if I go to edit light again, I've also just given them a name in the bottom. And it just means that then in conjunction with the visualization palette, It just means that I then know what they are and I can turn them on and off using this palette, okay? So the other thing as well as the spotlight lighting devices, a lot of lighting a model can be done with just using the light object tool. So I'll just explain where that is. So in this instance, I've got a little point source lighting device, and I'm just using it to illuminate the space, and I'm also getting it to do lit fog. Now it's not casting any shadows, so this is also quite useful for lighting a model. If you just want to kind of accent and heighten the illumination in a particular area of a model, but you don't want it to be obviously lit, then you can turn off cast shadows. And you can also just use this as a way to create haze in your model as well. Okay, so the last two things I want to quickly show you before we run out of time is some of the exporting visuals of this model. If I just go to I've got a save view here, which basically places me sort of bang in the center of the model. If I just go to the walkthrough tool, we can have a bit of a look around. So the reason I've done this is because I want to make a 3D panorama of this to send to my clients, just so it gives them an idea of what the event is going to look like. So I can, once I've placed myself in this particular view, I can then do export 3D panorama. Okay, and I can choose those render styles that I talked about earlier. You can also choose a particular render style for your 3D panorama. So depending on how you want it to appear, you can also tell it how big you want it to be in terms of pixels. And this is really interesting now. So I could essentially take my machine out of action for a good 20 to 30 minutes by getting my computer to create this. However, if you're on VSS, which the majority of Vectorworks uses in the UK, particularly Spotlight, this is a really great feature of that. So I can actually get this done on the Vectorworks cloud. Now, the way this works is it saves a copy of this file onto the Vectorworks cloud, which is a bit like Dropbox. And then one of our machines, one of our servers, actually does all of the hard work for you and creates this 3D panorama. In terms of what this looks like, I can just show you an OpenGL preview, which will take a minute or two to generate. So the client will essentially be sent this through a web browser, which if they use on an iPhone, or I think on an Android it works. Obviously this is a low quality version, it's just giving you an idea of what it's going to look like. But it can be used in conjunction with VR goggles as well. So your client can then pop their handsets or iOS device or Android device into some goggles and view the model in a 3D. And this doesn't really require any input from you. It's all done by us, unless you're rendering on your machine, which is fine. So the other thing I wanted to show you is the create animation has changed somewhat since I used to play around with it. It used to be, they used to create save views to string an animation together. Now it's much more intuitive. So I was essentially just drawing a polyline, which I showed you earlier on when we created the seating section. And with the polyline, you can then go to model and then, I always forget where it is. Model, create animation, and then you can basically create a walkthrough path from this selection. Which once you've done that and clicked and checked that option, this is what gets created. Okay, so there it is. And I've also got a camera object here. So this is essentially showing me where the camera is focusing at any point along the path. So if we look at the object info palette for this, I can specify a total duration, first of all, for this animation, and then I can assign a camera height as well. Now I can also, you'll notice there's keyframes. So this is quite useful. So if I just click between each frame, it's going to show me where the camera is going to be pointing anywhere on the plane. I've been playing with this a lot, so its default option is it just follows the whole path, but because I've been doing a lot of playing around with this feature, it looks slightly different. It's really intuitive, so at any point in a top plan view, you can refocus the camera, and then you can also just zoom it in. So it is great. Now this may not be how you want to think about it, so it may be that a particular point you actually want the camera to point, higher up into the venue or down on the floor, for example. So if we just go to another keyframe, I can then activate the camera view for that frame. And now I've essentially got the edit camera on here. So I can just say, actually, at this point, I want to look up here. Okay, perfect. And that's, you don't have to save it. It just updates the animation. I can click next. I can click forward. It's back where we left it. Okay, so I can just step through all of these. Now you can get it to play, because it's quite a large model with lots of geometry, rather than wait a couple of seconds. We've got precious time left in the presentation. So the option here is I can just select create movie from the path I've made. And this is essentially going to ask me, do you want to use your computer to do this? Or again, this is another feature that can be done by our servers, which basically frees up your machine. Again, so I'm going to try this in 4K at some point. I haven't sent this off to be done yet, so I haven't got one to hand. But yeah, so it's a really great feature. You just click Save Movie, and it puts the movie file in your Vectorworks Cloud Services folder. Okay, so that's pretty much most of what we wanted to cover, I think, in this session. So you had some other stuff to talk about in terms of the university and stuff, Sarah?
Yes, so just to let you all know, I'll be sending out a recording of this webinar this afternoon, so you can all go over it again, watch any bits that you might have missed. But also, it's really worth checking out the Vectorworks University. It's absolutely full of resources, videos, tutorials. Yeah, get stuck in and have a go. So Tom's just showing you now some of the spotlight courses that you can take.
Yeah, so you can just sign up for any of these courses, and they're e-learning courses, so you can do them in your own time. We're also in the process of adding more content to this over the next week or so. Just do keep checking in with this, because the spotlight course we finished last week or so, so we're in the process of just checking that's all fine, and we're going to be uploading some more content. So do keep checking in with this website every week or so. Well, thanks very much for your time, everybody. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you very much, and remember to send in any ideas that you have for other webinars that we're going to do in the coming week. We're all at home. Fab. Thank you so much for joining us today.